Hello, welcome to Denton's Tales, the first of 2024. So, what wonderful conversational delights do I have for you to kick off the new year? I can just feel the eager anticipation. Well, there is a saying, a little rhyme, nothing like a bit of poetry, and it goes: those convinced against their will remain of the same opinion still. Yes. Short, to the point, and makes perfect sense. If you have to agree with something you don't agree with, well, then you'll hardly be fervently believing in it, will you? And that applies particularly to a religious conversion. Something, of course, that never stopped the zealous ones from forcing their views on others who didn't want them, often using extreme measures of persuasion that were the total opposite of what they were trying to convert those others to, and usually rather counterproductive. A very good case in point: the conversion of Iceland to Christianity. Now, it has all the hallmarks of the thing that is forced on someone that they don't really want. One of the strangest religious conversions in history, and probably about as genuine as a $20 Rolex. Yes. Once upon a time in Iceland, the gods of Åsgard reigned supreme. And Odin, Thor, and Freyr, to name but a few, pagan rituals were practiced, as indeed they had been in Scandinavia for centuries before the Norse had even discovered that Iceland was out there. And the early settlers were, of course, pagans. It is thought that the Norse discovered Iceland around 874 AD, and one story has it that a man named Nadod was sailing from Norway to the Faroe Islands, but he got lost. Yes, he got lost. Even the Old Norse, the Old Norse, amazing navigators though they were, could get lost, and he did. Sort of drifting to Iceland purely by mistake. He must have felt a right wally after that one. I mean, a Viking who sailed right past his destination, we'd never live it down. Anyway, the first person to intentionally go there seems to have been one Hrafna Floki Vigorous, and he settled there with his family. Well, he had plenty of room to settle, since there was no native population in Iceland before the Norse arrived. The only other people had been a small colony of Gaelic monks from Ireland who had either left before the Norse arrived or just afterwards, leaving behind them quite a lot of items that were later found by the settlers. In fact, archaeologists recently discovered the remains of a cabin that seems to have been abandoned sometime after 770 AD, which gives credence to that story. Now, once they knew it was there, Iceland was settled very, very quickly indeed, becoming a little bastion of the gods of Åsgard out amid the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. But, yes, there's always a but, isn't there? There's always a but. Towards the end of the 9th century, new ideas were beginning to spread. Oh yes, a new faith that had its origins in distant Palestine, gradually taking root in Scandinavia, and eventually reaching out into the Atlantic to Iceland in the 10th century. Now, this would become known as the Kristnitika, the taking of Christianity, something that would drastically change Icelandic society, or completely turn it upside down, put it on its head. The first Christian missionaries arrived in Iceland around the year 980 AD. But, they met with very little success. The Icelanders, they weren't even remotely interested in swapping their multitudinous gods for just one. I mean, just one god to do everything. Well, he'd be so overworked, wouldn't he? I mean, he wouldn't get a minute. No. And the missionaries, well, they departed without ever having had any real influence on the country. Now, note, this is quite important, that they were not harmed. Oh no, they were not forcibly driven out, and nobody was killed, in stark contrast, of course, to what would have happened to pagan missionaries, if pagans had ever had such things, which of course they didn't. They weren't interested in converting other people. And if they had, and they had gone to a Christian country in medieval Europe, the church would have welcomed them. Oh, yes, they would have welcomed them with open arms. They'd have been invited to a barbecue in the town square, yes. And they would have been the barbecue. Yes, and well done, too. The church didn't believe in medium rare, not by a long way. But in 995 AD, a rather unlovely gentleman named Olaf Tryggvason became king of Norway. He began a highly aggressive campaign to convert everyone to Christianity, not only in his own country, whether of course they liked it or not, which almost brought about a civil war between pagans and Christians, but also Norse territories overseas, such as the Faroe Islands and of course Iceland. Now he dispatched one Stefnir Thorgolson to Iceland, and that lovely gentleman had orders to, well, help the people, shall we say, to see the beauty of Christianity. Yes, the message of love and turning the other cheek and all that. Oh, noble sentiments, to be sure, very noble. There couldn't be more noble than that. Which Stefnir did with a considerable lack of subtlety, you could say, using extreme violence, destroying pagan temples and images, and threatening people with painful punishments to make them understand the Christian message of love and peace and forgiveness. His methods of bringing joy to all rather resemble the later Spanish Inquisition. You will learn the way of peace, the way of love. You will learn to love thy neighbor. You will be kind and gentle to all. You will drip the milk of human kindness and overflow with compassion for your fellow man. Or else I will beat the stuffing out of you until you know the way of love and gentleness. Yes! Sure. Accept the gospel of peace and love and turn the other cheek, or I'll break something. Now, since he himself showed no sign of any of those very admirable virtues that he was trying to get people to accept, the total opposite, in fact, of all of them, all he did succeed in doing was making himself so detested the Icelanders declared him an outlaw and they kicked him out. And jolly good too, that showed him. So next, King Olaf sent a priest named Thangbrand to try a more subtle method of persuasion, maybe even with a bit of actual love and forgiveness in it. Yes, there's a thought, since the embrace, love or die method hadn't worked very well. And to be sure, the new approach, it worked a bit better. Oh, it did, yes, it worked a bit better. But it still had very little real effect, and it only managed to bring a very small number of people into the new faith. But at least those converts didn't get black eyes and a few broken bones in the process. And the non-converters, well, they were still alive, which was a considerable bonus. And probably wouldn't have been the case over in Norway with the lovely King Olaf close by. However, that very minuscule success really pissed off King Olaf. Well, he was really rather easily pissed off at the best of times anyway. He liked to get his own way, and he had no scruples about how he got it. Now, Iceland was almost entirely reliant on imports. Now, they had lots of fish. They were surrounded by every kind of fish you could think of. Whales, too, since they were out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But they had very little of anything else. There were no raw materials. Almost all of the forests had already been cut down. You couldn't really plant fish. They didn't make good building material. And, well, you couldn't make clothing out of them or burn them in the hearth. Whales, of course, yes, they provided oil for lamps, but you couldn't really build a house out of one. King Olaf, he thought about that. Oh, yes, he put a lot of thought into this. He was no fool. And he cut off all trade links with the island, blocking Norwegian ports and the ports of other Norse possessions to Icelandic ships. And he detained Icelanders, some of them relatives of very prominent citizens back home, who happened to be living in Norway, taking them as hostages and threatening to kill them in retaliation for non-conversion to the beautiful ideals of love, peace, joy, cheek-turning, etc., etc. Ideals which he himself seems to have had a rather vague concept of. He certainly never followed any of them. Iceland faced a dilemma. Oh, and it was quite a dilemma. Accept the new faith and restore the trade they needed to survive, or reject it and risk a civil war as well as trading restrictions that would bring the country to economic ruin, albeit very well fed on fish, of course. Being pagan wasn't just a problem with King Olaf either. Oh, no, not by a long way, since the church, you see, forbade Christians to trade with pagans anyway. You couldn't be trading with those evil pagans. Oh, good heavens, you couldn't possibly do that. You'd burn in hell forever if you did things like that. And of course, that made trade with Christian countries a bit difficult, or even impossible altogether, depending on how far those countries were prepared to look the other way over the church's ban. So, in the year 1000 AD, some scholars suggest it was 999 AD, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, what's a year between friends? The ruling families of Iceland, not wanting a civil war and an exclusively fishy diet over the matter if they could help it, decided to put the matter to the Althing, which was the annual gathering at which important matters were discussed and laws enacted and so on. A sort of an early version of a think tank, you might say. Thorgeir Thorkelson, the law speaker of the Althing, and himself a pagan, said he would consider the matter on condition, yes, there were conditions, that all parties agreed to abide by his decision, whatever way it might go, yea or nay. Well, everyone accepted that. They didn't really have very much choice, I suppose. And Thorgeir, he retired to consider the weighty question. Now, he got himself all cozy and comfy under a nice fur blanket, and he stayed there for a whole day and a night meditating and contemplating. I mean, you couldn't rush a thing like that. No, you couldn't. Careful deliberation was required, preferably all snug under a nice blanket. You know, it gets a bit chilly in Iceland, at least, well, when there isn't a volcano popping up somewhere. Anyway, when he emerged from under his fur blanket after his cozy meditation, he decided that Iceland would become a Christian country. Just like that. Instant conversion. The entire population was converting as one. Pagan one day, oh no, very bad, that. Christian the next, oh so very good. King Olaf would be so pleased. No more of the dreadful pagan carrying on. Oh no. The greatest conversion to another faith in history, and the least genuine. What religion are we? The law speaker said we're all Christians. Oh, all right then. Yes, I don't see a lot of religious fervour in that somehow. No, not even a tiny spark. Now, he stipulated, however, oh yes, there were stipulations. Olaf wasn't getting his conversion without a caveat. And the stipulation was that pagan worship in private, behind closed doors, that would continue. And old customs, such as, eating horse meat, a Germanic custom outlawed by Pope Gregory III in 732 AD, and the exposure of unwanted infants out to the elements as a way of keeping the population down, would be permitted. And that was a novel method of birth control. You know, you do it after birth rather than before conception. No, it did work, but it was a bit, yes. Now, after the stipulations, Thorgeir threw all his pagan idols into a waterfall. The other people followed suit. The waterfall becoming known as the Godafoss, the waterfall of the gods. Thus, the conflicts that marked the Christianization of Norway were avoided, and they all lived happily ever after, right? No, unfortunately they didn't. You see, once the church got full control over Iceland, oh, yes, the people discovered that ideas of love and joy and peace and cheek-turning somehow became enforced intolerance and a lack of love for anything that wasn't actually taught by the church. So all pagan practices, all of them, even ones in private, behind closed doors, out of sight of anybody, nobody knew what was going on. No, they were all banned. Banned, I tell you, banned. No, you can't be doing evil things like that, even if you are doing it in the privacy of your own room behind doors and no one outside could see it. No. Yes, I bet you didn't see that coming. Now, not that the ban prevented people from doing it anyway, however risky it might be, and a lot of them did. They kept on doing it. And pagan traditions have lingered in Iceland even down to the present day. Belief in the Landvatir, for example, the guardian spirits of the land, as well as the Huldafolk, the hidden people or elves. You know, they even build little houses for them. You'll see them dotted around in the countryside, little windows and doors, very bono little dwellings all together. And that's not a tourist gimmick. Oh no, it's not like the leprechauns in Ireland. I mean, sure, they're only for the American tourists. Like they love the little people, so they do. No, the Icelanders actually believe in them, which I think is rather nice, actually. It has been suggested that trade and advantage of that sort with Christian countries, and keeping the peace played a much greater part in the decision to adopt the new faith than any actual religious convictions. And indeed, conversion by agreeing to do so if somebody else decided it would be a good idea, well, it's hardly a sign of genuine religious conviction, is it? Political expediency and the desire to keep their heads where they like them to be, right there on their shoulders, seems far more likely. Also, later Christian religious fervour among the people, it never rose to the extreme heights in Iceland that it did in most of Europe during the Middle Ages. Now, Iceland never descended quite that far into the Dark Ages, as they're called. King Olaf did much the same thing at the same time in the Faroe Islands, by the way, continuing his valiant efforts to bring peace, love, and joy to everybody, even though they didn't want it, and they'd die if they didn't accept the love and peace and joy. Yes, he wasn't so good at turning the cheek himself. But then that's a tale for another time. We'll talk about that another time. So, that all that remains now is for me to say I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Farewell. Goodbye.